All right. So hopefully the audio is coming out. Sorry, I'm a little like really sweating over here. It's a hot day today in Anaheim. It's been 99 degrees or thereabouts. The last, I think today's the third day. This last gasp of summer, right? Trying to hang on. So it's pretty warm here. Usually it's about 10 degrees, sometimes up to 15 degrees cooler than the Central Valley where I grew up. But it's pretty hot. And it can be a little more humid down here, although everybody talks about, when it's a dry heat. People will say, well, when you get to 100, I don't think it really matters. Um, so just a few quick updates. Working on the Mysteries of Eden podcast. That's why you'll see the thumbnail here. That's got the serpent and Adam and Eve and the tree, right? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Um, and so we're going to run through some things on that in another episode, in an actual podcast. But we're touching on that briefly, touching on Satan, right? The form of Satan. Why was Satan in the garden? Was he already fallen? Was he? Did the garden happen before or after the events depicted in Isaiah 14? Well, it was after. Let's go there real quick. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 14, and let's go to verse 12. This is a New Living Translation. It says, "How you are fallen from heaven, O shining star, son of the morning." That's where we get Lucifer from, right? Which is a Latin word meaning morning star or day star, or so O shining star, son of the morning, right? Another term I believe in Hebrew is Helel ben Shakar, right? The son of the morning or the son of the dawn. You have been thrown down to the earth, you who destroyed the nations of the world. So is this a future event or is this in the past? So, for you said to yourself, because it's now it's speaking. Sorry, I know I keep interrupting myself. It's speaking in a past tense. So, but sometimes prophecy does that. So, for you said to yourself, verse 13, I will ascend to heaven and set my throne above God's stars. I will preside on the mountain of the gods far away in the north. I will climb to the highest heavens and be like the Most High. Instead, you will be brought down to the place of the dead, down to its lowest depths. Everyone there will stare at you and ask, can this be the one who shook the earth and made the kingdoms of the world tremble? Is this the one who destroyed the world and made it into a wasteland? Is this the king who demolished the world's greatest cities and had no mercy on his prisoners? Now, I have my own theories on this. It doesn't come out and say it straight up, but I'm myself, and I would say many Bible scholars and theologians believe that this is describing not only the fall of Satan, but that it took place before the events in the Garden of Eden, right? Because he's already on earth. I know we know the Bible also calls him the prince of the power of the air, and they also refer to Beelzebub, which is a sort of a twisting of Baal Zebul, which is Prince Baal, or Baal the prince, Baal the prince, right? Instead, they call him basically the Lord of Flies or the Lord of Dung. It's a what do we call that? Sorry, it's called a what's the word? I can't remember right now. A pejorative. A pejorative. That was basically we're making an insult out of him. So we go over to, where is it? Ezekiel 28. Here we go, right here. Son of man, that's what Ezekiel referred to himself as, and that's what Christ refers to himself as also. Now, real quick, son of man, we'll give you a little nugget here too. It didn't always mean the son of Adam, right? Like the son of man, like you're a human being. In Jesus' time, and even in Daniel's time, like the son of man, because I believe Daniel also mentions that, it actually refers to, in non-Jewish and non-Christian circles, be like a demigod kind of, or like a son of a god, something between God and man. In the case of how we see Jesus Christ, it'd be like a mediator, right, between man and God. So something higher than human beings. So Ezekiel says, verse 12, chapter 28, verse 12, Son of man, sing this funeral song for the king of Tyre. Give him this message from the sovereign Lord. You were the model of perfection, full of wisdom and exquisite in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Your clothing was adorned with every precious stone, red carnelian, pale green peridot, white moonstone, blue-green beryl onyx, green jasper, blue lapis lazuli, turquoise, and emerald, all beautifully crafted for you and set in the finest gold. They were given to you on the day you were created. So this isn't someone who was anointed a king, right? This is someone who's created. The day you were created, I ordained and anointed you as the mighty angelic guardian. You had access to the holy mountain of God and walked among the stones of fire. You were blameless in all you did from the day you were created until the day evil was found in you. Your rich commerce led you to violence, and you sinned. So I banished you in disgrace from the mountain of God. I expelled you, O mighty guardian, from your place among the stones of fire. Here's the sin. Your heart was filled with pride because of all your beauty. Your wisdom was corrupted by your love of splendor. So I threw you to the ground and exposed you to the curious gaze of kings. You defiled your sanctuaries with your many sins and your dishonest trade. So I brought fire out from within you, and it consumed you. I reduced you to ashes on the ground in the sight of all who were watching. All who knew you are appalled at your fate. You have come to a terrible end, and you will exist no more. Now, we know that a lot of times scriptures have a dual application. Like in this case, it's referring to a person, an actual king of Tyre, but also Tyre was not a huge kingdom. It wasn't like Babylon. It wasn't like the Medo-Persian Empire, right? It wasn't like Greece or Rome. It wasn't one of these. In fact, Hiram of Tyre would supply Solomon. He helped Solomon out and supplied him with, I believe, like cedars from Lebanon and gold and things like that to build the temple. But in no way was it ever a massive kingdom or an empire. So he's describing not only the person, but the power behind the throne, so to speak. So, interesting note. When God created Adam, he made him out of the dust of the ground, right? From the dust of the earth, he made Adam. And the same word for dust in that part in Genesis when it describes the creation of man by God. Later when the serpent is cursed also, God says that you're cursed and dust is what you're going to eat, right? You're going to eat dust. So it's interesting because Satan really, as the Lord of death after this point, I mean, he caused the spiritual death of mankind, or at least enticed and tempted them to make those choices, which caused their spiritual death and their expulsion from the garden. He became the ruler. He usurped or tricked Adam into giving up his dominion, right? And then Satan, that's why when he tells Jesus, bow down and worship me and I'll give you, the kingdoms of the earth are mine and I'll give you, I'm paraphrasing, I can give anything to you that I wish because they were mine. And he was telling the truth. He's the God of this world. So interestingly enough, Satan is condemned to eat the very thing that man is made out of. But then you get to the tragic tale of Cain and Abel, where Cain's sacrifice is not accepted, but Abel's is, because Abel's is a blood sacrifice. When in the garden, when Adam talks about Eve, he said, this is flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. He never says blood of my blood. Just like Jesus, when it talks about how he poured his blood out on the mercy seat, and he tells them, when the disciples, when they think he's a ghost, he says, a ghost doesn't have flesh and bone. If the life is in the blood, but that life is fleeting and mortal, and we're all doomed to die, at least in this, from this mortal frame, right, from our human body, then what are the glorified bodies animated by but the spirit? So I would say the Bible doesn't come out and say it, but it does. I believe you can, again, I wouldn't teach this as doctrine, like the doctrine of salvation, for instance, right? Or the doctrine of the Trinity, for instance. But I would say that I do have a strong leaning towards the idea or theory or concept that when Adam and Eve sinned, when they took a bite, when they disobeyed God and they knew good from evil, then at that point, they no longer had the spirit animating them. They had the breathing, they had their personalities, their mind, will, and emotions and all that. But then it was the blood pumping through them that gave them life. So when Abel's blood was spilled on the ground, God told Cain, your brother's blood cries out from the ground, upon which it was spilled. And here's Satan, who eats the dust, right? The serpent is condemned to eat the dust of the ground. So I think there's a connection there as well. And that's why you see so many human sacrifices throughout Scripture. Why are there so many blood sacrifices? And I don't mean on the part of the Israelites, right? I don't mean on the part of where God commands them. But also think about this. If God commanded those blood sacrifices, and to go into the Holy of Holies and sprinkle the blood on the mercy seat, right? The high priest, they would do once every year. If God's requirement for the covering of sins was a blood sacrifice, so what do we think what do we think Satan demanded? But blood. And it's a recurring thing throughout ancient civilization, whether it's child sacrifice, human sacrifice, blood, and also sexual rituals that would go along with it often, quite often. You get things like the history of like the Carthaginians, and we're finding things now that we didn't know before about human and especially child sacrifices going on in the ancient world. And it's the blood, right? It was like the blood was demanded. And so, like I said, this all sort of ties in. You've got the serpent that has to eat the dust. Well, mankind comes from the dust. Also, Adam. I know this seems all over the place, but it's all about Eden, right? Humanity at one point actually lived off of the vegetation, right? They ate of the garden or the trees in the garden, but they did so for pleasure. It didn't say that it was necessarily for sustenance so much. But then afterwards, they had to toil and to grow these things so that they could eat and they could survive. And then later, it was after the flood when God permitted Noah and his family and told them, now you can eat meat, basically. So prior to that, it's assumed that human beings were vegetarian. So, or vegan. I get those two mixed up, sorry. But it's a lot of interesting stuff. I know, again, it may seem like it's all over the place, but there's a reason behind it. So God basically drags Satan down for the greatest sin of all, his pride. Now, bear in mind, he didn't say, I want to be the Most High. I'm going to knock God off his throne. He said, I will climb to the highest heavens and be like the Most High. But that wasn't his place. God said in Ezekiel, I anointed you as this. I created you as this. This is your role. And Satan rebelled. And unfortunately, you have people sort of with that same mindset. We have a society that are going more towards the days of Noah. If we read, the passages in early Genesis, going towards Genesis 6, where we're getting back to that, that part of history sort of, it's cycling through again. And so it says right here again, instead he will be brought down to the place of the dead, right? Satan is the Lord of the dead. I know, especially around Halloween, like certain things are like glorified. We think, oh, this is cool, and we'll present things certain ways. And I grew up Pentecostal, and charismatic, so it was almost like a lot of times the devil was made to be not like a joke, but almost like there's no, I don't want to say reverence or healthy respect, but it's not a joke. It's not a joke. You're talking about a being that has, again, this is a Lord of death who demands sacrifice and still gets it. And so, and yet, even I believe it's the Church of Satan, they don't even necessarily believe in Satan as a real being, but more like as a concept or, complete unrestrained, I would call it hedonism, but like liberty. But in fact, I would say things like that, like a lot of the way our society is going towards, is going back into the bondage of sin, and the wages of sin is death. So anyway, that's just a little bit on some of the mysteries of Eden that we're going to be covering. We're going to be covering the garden itself. Where was it? Was it a mountain? Was it a garden? Was it a garden on a mountain? Because it talks about it being both. We'll talk also about later on about the similarities with God's mountains, like Mount Moriah, right, where Abraham was told to sacrifice Isaac, his son, and where Jesus later made the ultimate sacrifice. I want to get into also Golgotha, the place of the skull, because there are legends that go back nearly to the time of the apostles, and actually I think probably before, an old Judaic legends and lore about that's where Adam was actually buried, and the place of the skull referred to the skull of Adam that was buried at Golgotha. So that's kind of a an interesting idea as well. And again, it goes back centuries in the Christian tradition, and it goes back even further, I believe, in Jewish tradition. So we'll talk about the place of the skull and the burial of Adam. And we'll talk about maybe some of the apocryphal books, get into those, why they're not in the scripture, but some of the interesting things that they say. And so we'll talk about also the parallels between Lucifer, right, and Quetzalcoatl and the Chicxulub crater. I've been through these a few times before, but how we have these dragon legends, and a friend brought that up today about, was it possibly a dragon when they mentioned serpent? And absolutely, it could have been a winged serpent. And why? As dragons were known to speak in the ancient world and even up to the Middle Ages. So, and they do a lot of times it involves a tree and sacred apples, right? Like in the I believe the golden apples of the Hesperides, I think, with Hercules, right? That one of the 12 labors of Hercules, and there was like a dragon or a serpent that was around there, or the Hydra maybe. So there are variations on these myths and these themes, so it's always a little difficult to pin them down. But also Hercules, or Heracles, as he was in the Greek, is also known as Melkart, right? He was the god of the city, and that was another form of some of these other gods, like possibly Nimrod or Ninurta. So there's a lot of this stuff, right? And here's another quick bit. Crucifixion. We talked about the place of the skull and the crucifixion of Jesus. Crucifixion, also in legend, is thought to have been invented by Nimrod and Semiramis, his wife, who in some legends was a mermaid come out of the sea. So we'll get into some things like that. And they're the ones that founded the Babylonian mystery schools back during the time of the Tower of Babel. And was the Tower of Babel completed? Yes, it was, at least as far as some of the texts that I've read. And no, they didn't think it was actually going to reach into the heavens. They weren't that ignorant that they thought they could somehow get high enough to get God. It was more, in a sense, kind of like a temple, right? It was like the Holy of Holies, like you're actually going into the presence, where in the idea of the temple, the Shekinah glory would appear above the mercy seat between the wings of the cherubim. But in this case, they were trying to invoke the gods through the Tower of Babel. Right. And I believe Babel itself is something like mountain of the god or something to that extent. It's something God. And so, or gateway to the god, the Ishtar gate, right? The throne of Pergamum, where Satan's throne was said to be at by Jesus in the Revelation to John. Talked about that. Well, that's actually in Berlin, I believe now. It went to Germany, then it went to like Leningrad or whatever, and then it went back to Germany. So that's where Satan's throne is today. We'll get into all that too. So again, a lot of stuff. Things are going well. My voice is coming back a little bit better. And we'll get into some more cool things. All right. You all take care. God bless you. Bye-bye.